Several historic agreements were signed this week that are seeking to promote utility scale solar in the United States. Solar manufacturing is surging here in the US, largely in part due to provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act. And the up till now resistant rural electrical co ops are jumping onto the solar bandwagon and moving towards renewable energy. I'm Jay Warmke with Blue Rock Station, and this is the news from the solar industry for the week of October 22nd. All right, well, there have been a landmark agreement this week was signed, bringing together solar developers, land conservation groups, environmental organizations, tribal nations representatives, agricultural interests, as well as community groups, and even investors, looking to address any of the potential issues that may arise as this nation moves towards more and more industrial scale or utility scale solar systems. Large solar is expected to grow about 5 times or fivefold over the next 10 years. And this agreement is looking towards trying to avoid or prevent as many of the issues that will surround the transitions of agricultural land into solar production, wildlife and habitat impacts of these installations, as well as any community resistance or engaging the local communities into the development of these solars as we're going through this energy transition. So the agreement has taken about 20 months to develop, and it was brokered by the Stanford Woods Institute for Environment, the Solar Energy Industries Association, as well as the Nature Conservatory. Now, this framework that's now in place, there will be working groups working on this as new issues arrive, making recommendations to the industry. Speaking of agreements, 3 unions have come together to agree essentially how they're going to divvy up utility scale solar installations. This is the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the Laborers International Union of North America, as well as the International Union of Operating Engineers. Now, all of these unions have now agreed on which portions of the project belong to them, essentially. Now, this is important because the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, did stipulate that these large systems have to pay prevailing wage, or essentially union wages, and also they must have apprenticeship programs in place. So unions are going to be responsible for building the vast majority of these systems. Domestic solar capacity has soared here recently, again, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. Qcells just this week announced that they have begun producing solar cells at their large plant in Dalton, Georgia. Now, since the IRA passed last August, 72 new manufacturing facilities have been announced here in the U.S. In 2022, for example, the U.S. produced only about 5 gigawatts of solar, while importing about 29 gigawatts of solar panels. The Qcell plant alone in Dalton, Georgia, will produce about 5.1 gigawatts of solar panels per year. Now, the new manufacturing facilities are said to have or project to have a capacity of about 70 gigawatts annually, and CEA, the Solar Energy Industries Association, projects that 42 gigawatts of this will be operational by 2027, and that's enough to meet about 90% of the US's demand for solar panels. Domestic manufacturing growth is not limited just to solar panels. Fronius, one of the largest inverter companies in the world, has announced they're expanding their facility in Portage, Indiana. This will be a 400,000 square foot manufacturing facility. Now, this new production plant will increase their domestic workforce from about 200 to about 500 workers. It's going to have a capacity to generate about 1 gigawatt of inverting capacity each year by the end of 2024, with expansion plans of moving that up to about 7 gigawatts by 2029. And the USDA has announced that they've received a flood of applications from rural electrical co-ops for funding that's in place to transition a lot of the energy generation to solar. They've received about 750 project proposals over the last year. That's about twice the amount that they could fund with the $9.7 billion of money that's part of the Infrastructure Act. Now, the utilities, the co-ops have been traditionally very reluctant to transition to renewable energy. They rely very heavily on coal as their source of energy generation. In fact, the co-ops have only closed down about 15% of the coal generating facilities. This compares with about 57% of the coal plants that have been closed by other utilities. They are struggling to transition in large part because co-ops are nonprofit organizations, and all of the incentives to transition to solar and wind have typically been tax credits that just simply don't apply. But the new IRA provisions do say that nonprofits can also participate and essentially get a rebate back from the government. Now, there's some headwinds on this. There are 4 states, in fact, Florida, South Dakota, Iowa, and Kentucky, whose legislatures have seen fit to prohibit co-ops from taking any of the money from the IRA that might be available because they've decided this is simply just a handout to China. So I guess more for the rest of us. And that's the news from the solar industry for this week. We'll see you next week.